Hi, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode with Hill Coaching Company. Here to help you become a better version of yourself today. And you'll be glad to hear it's not me for a change. I know the last few episodes have either been me or it's been a rehash of an old podcast and so forth. But one of my current clients, Nathan Shoesmith, has come in today, and we've got a couple of episodes lined up. But first of all, as you know, I always like to give as much information as I possibly can from client experiences. To help other people. And so you'll learn in another podcast about Nathan's career and its really impressive rise from a very young age. But this one's quite a serious one, and I think it's going to be very helpful to people who've gone through any sort of trauma in their life. But Nathan was unfortunate enough to suffer a brain injury not too long ago. And I thought it would just be useful to do a short episode in how he's sort of dealt with that, the challenges that you faced, any particular recommendations he may or may not have for anybody who's going through the exact same problems or something similar. And I just thought it would be really interesting for the audience to hear. So, Nathan, I'm happy for you to talk about as much or as little as you want about the events leading to it. I think it's the trauma itself which is the key component. But would you like to sort of just give a little introduction about what on earth it is I'm referring to here?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. In January 2020, I unfortunately got a elbow to the head, just walking past someone on pavement, um, and fairly. I guess it seems listening to it, and at the time, sort of a fairly small injury. Um, but what often tends to be the case with head injuries is that they could be hardly anything recover straight away, but also they can be really big things that go on to affect people longer term. I think, they say that one punch can kill somebody, and particularly sort of in the head area, it's very fragile. So, sort of any sort of accidental incident could turn into something much worse. And suffered elbow to head. Didn't really think too much of it at the time. Sort of had check up the next day and seemed all right, but 3 days later, I'm sort of really struggling with different things, listening to stuff, walking around. And that's sort of when I ended up in A&E for emergency brain scans. Quite often these things have a delayed effect.
Yeah. Okay, so it was one of those things that we're all very guilty of doing, where we just ignore
Yeah.
signals for a little bit, but eventually it becomes out of our control, and you had no choice. You had to sort of go and report. And
Yeah. And it's a scary experience because you don't know what's going on, and particularly with those sorts of injuries, it's very hard to much like other types of injuries and illnesses, you don't necessarily know what the diagnosis is, how long it might take to recover from. So it's quite difficult to sort of work it out. And it was sort of over the sort of following months that it probably had the worst impacts in terms of sort of really bad headaches and sort of being limited in how much I could work. Also mental health effects, different impacts like that. Some of which have definitely got better over time and much better now than I was 4 years ago. But some things like being light sensitive and sort of being careful about how you do stuff sort of stick around longer term.
yeah, so I think that the first thing that immediately comes to mind for me with a sort of coaching hat on is, in some ways, unlucky as you were with the first instance, the fact that it became out of your control, you kind of had to seek help and so forth, that it kind of forced your hand a little bit. Whereas I can think of examples, probably even people listening today, who might well have done something or had an incident or had something happen to them and have done nothing about it because there's no obvious signs of anything. So I think the first thing is don't ignore when something's happened, when something serious has happened, and in this case it's obviously physical. Don't just presume that you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
In some regards, unlucky as the event was, you were lucky that symptoms came through and your hand was forced. So that would be my first thing that
Yeah.
I would encourage people to take away from that is just think back now and even in the past has something happened. I'll give you a completely minor version. Also, it didn't feel minor at the time, but when I was very young, I had a car accident, and a car pulled out in front of me, and I was going probably about 50, 60 miles an hour, and effectively a head-on collision. And I know I got whiplash. Absolutely guaranteed I got whiplash. And I also know, being young, I just ignored it. And we can't be absolutely certain, but I've had an all neck and shoulder pain in the last sort of, I don't know, 5-7 years. And you could easily trace it back to me not looking after myself at that particular time. So I thought it was really interesting, though, when talking to Nathan, with you being young, to just encourage young people in particular, but not exclusively, because your body does remember these things, as far as I'm concerned. So I think that's the first thing that comes to mind. The second I kind of want to just talk you through, or get you to talk through, really, is how you dealt with the the trauma, as it were.
Yeah.
Not necessarily specifically the symptoms of the specific head injury, but just in general terms, something that was unexpected, happened to you out of the blue, it's had consequences. What was the sort of coping mechanism? How did you start, and how did you move on?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I definitely agree with your point around sort of getting stuff checked out and not waiting on stuff and thinking it'll be fine. Don't sort of sit up all hours and worry about stuff, but actually sort of get stuff checked out. But in terms of dealing with it, I think with anything like that, you sort of go through different stages of it. And I've spoken to lots of people that have had similar injuries, some more minor, some much, much worse, and consider myself very lucky. And sort of common theme that comes out is you go through a period of sort of wondering why me, and sort of questioning why it's happened to you. And depending on the sort of injury as well, you go through a period where you're sort of really limited in what you can do. And I sort of had that more short term in terms of being really limited in what I could do, sort of taking several weeks away from what I was doing. But also that longer term impact you sort of have to learn to live with. But the injury for me happened 3 months before COVID, which in itself impacted some of the ways that you could sort of get support. It was harder to sort of see people, but also meant that a lot of stuff that you would have been doing otherwise sort of stopped. But often when people talk to me about it, I sort of compare it to COVID in some ways, because quite often you don't sort of recognize or appreciate some things as much until you've lost them. And through COVID, whether it was unfortunately through losing loved ones, or whether it's just everything going into lockdown and stopping what you did on a day-to-day basis, a lot of people, whether they've had a sort of serious injury or illness, or whether it was living through COVID, can some way sort of resonate with that experience.
Yeah.
And I think the experience of COVID changed a lot of people's sort of views on things, and how people sort of spend time with each other, treat different things, which I obviously had living through COVID. But also from the injury, it does sort of change your perspectives on life an awful lot.
Yeah. Okay. So when you say change your perspective, does it sort of make you reevaluate things? Does it maybe you think about why you do what you do, and I don't know, why you're here and your purpose and things? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it does make you reevaluate things, and I think it sort of makes you sort of try to make more use of the time you've got. And you, as with injuries, COVID, anything like that, you never really know what's around the corner. And obviously, the world is increasingly volatile as well, and you don't really know what's around the corner. So I think it's those sort of moments that sort of change how you look at things, and some things you might stop doing, but some things you just sort of care about a lot more when you do it. And yeah, it does sort of change your perspective. I think several things that I've sort of done since the injury I probably wouldn't have done uh, had I not had the injury, in terms of exploring different places, writing my books, and other different experiences you don't necessarily seek out, or certainly not straight away. I think it does sort of change your view on a few things.
Yeah, and I mean that's a really interesting point, because it's part of why I'm interested in the subject area, because whilst obviously it's overly a negative thing that's triggered this, what it has actually done is it's challenged your own thinking, hasn't it? It's made you reflect on things in a mainly. I know you've had various ups and downs with the thinking, but in the main,
Yeah.
it's made you think differently about that. If you went back, I mean, it might not be possible, but could you start to think about the sort of thoughts and questions you had for yourself that made you feel differently? What were the triggers? Because obviously, people who don't have a trauma or an accident can still do with the same jolt, as it were, the same encouragement to just reevaluate things.
Yeah, I think it's probably a mixture of factors. It's difficult to sort of trace it back. I mean, I think that sort of sudden impact definitely plays a role. Um, but I mean, what I'd also say is, when you sort of have an experience like that, you want to, well, sometimes you might not want to, but I'd really encourage people to sort of seek out other people that have had similar experiences. And I think that in itself can act as a trigger potentially to that sort of shift in thinking sometimes. So I've spent time with lots of people that have had similar experiences, similar injuries, and it can have a massive impact on their lives from where they were before. But it's about what can you do in the here and now, rather than sort of looking back and ruminating on what you may or may not have been able to do before. Actually, what can you do now in that space? And I've sort of had the pleasure of finding out some really inspirational stories of people that have done that and have had sort of really limiting injuries and illnesses, much worse than me, and have been able to sort of use it really positively, and think about it in that way, which when you first have it, it's really difficult to do. And it's certainly a process which takes time. We're certainly not sort of saying that everything bad you can suddenly look on in a positive way. These sort of things take a lot of time. But I think sort of once you get past the initial stages of thinking about why has it happened to you, and worrying about different things, actually talking to people that have had similar experiences might be able to sort of help with different things, but also just being the environment around people. Also, I found reading sort of lots of positive stuff, which you have read with a lot as well, sort of help shift that thinking as well. So I think it's a mixture of factors.
Yeah.
Really.
So would you say that those, because I really like that idea of reaching out to people and looking to find people who've been through the same experiences. You know, in the world that I am, mentoring comes up a lot. So if you take like a business experience, we're talking to someone who's been there and done it and so forth. It's incredibly helpful, and it's no different to something like this. How did you go about that? Was it mostly online and social media groups, or were there organisations or charities? What sort of things should people be looking out for?
Yeah, so I mean, it's obviously different for different types of experiences, but yeah, certainly look online, which I mean, a lot of stuff has sort of moved online in recent years, but there's definitely value in face-to-face interaction where it's possible. And for sort of brain injuries, there's a variety of different charities, community groups that run throughout the country, things like Headway, the Brain Injury Association, and there's various sort of groups for different types of brain injuries, brain tumours, and all sorts of other support groups for different illnesses and injuries as well. But as you say, this can extend far beyond sort of a negative experience. And I think it's probably something I've tried to take a bit more into life in general, in that I've probably sort of sought to engage with different communities and learn about them a lot more, and sort of bounce off one another, if you get what I mean. Far beyond sort of that sort of experience. But there's so many things in life, whether it's business, whether it's sort of mentoring, education, any of these things can be really useful to sort of surround yourselves with other people. And I think in recent years, because of people sort of being locked away from each other, there's sort of been a tendency sometimes to do that less. But it's really, really important that people keep doing that, and arguably even more now than potentially was done before.
Yeah. No, I think that's really sound advice, and I think it's, as we say with any episode, it's always really important that if anything here has triggered you, obviously you can reach out to me. It's my podcast, but Nathan is going to be available on LinkedIn, probably the easiest platform to get hold of you. And I know he's more than happy to talk to anybody who's had a direct issue like this, or one similar, and they maybe just need a little bit of help, support, steering in the right direction as to how they would go about it. You know, Nathan's really happy to talk. That's why he's come on and done the podcast. So the whole purpose of this episode is if it lands with you because it directly affects you, or maybe someone you know might be interested, you could forward it to them. The aim is to help those who it's going to help, you know, and if it's not for you, that's fine. That's absolutely not a problem. But you never know when it might be. And that's the thing that I always say about this. We're not necessarily dealing totally with now. This could be relevant to somebody from something in past experience. This also could be something that you come back to, you know, if unfortunately in the future something occurs. So I always want to thank anybody who comes on here and opens up about personal stuff. So first and foremost, thank you very much for doing that, Nathan. I really appreciate it. Are there any, and this isn't a trick question, there's no need to, but are there any final thoughts that you'd like to give anybody? I mean, I feel like you've wrapped it up really well there anyway, but any sort of final words you'd like to say if you were looking someone straight in the eye with an issue, anything you'd like to sort of give them encouragement on?
I think it is just recognising that these sorts of things are a process, and it will be different for everyone, but there's definitely things that you can do in terms of reaching out to others, to sort of find that support, however big or small it may be. Don't be afraid to sort of reach out to others and have a chat.
Excellent. Yeah, I echo that 100% as well. So thanks ever so much. I've got Nathan on for another episode, and depending on when I decide to play this, it's either about to come on in a couple of weeks, or this is 2 weeks after it. So we'll wait and see which way I go with it. But thanks again, Nathan. That's been really, really useful. And I look forward to recording the next episode, which is a bit more career focused.
Thank you.
Until the next episode, guys, thanks for listening.